Hi guys, this is Hero. How's everyone doing today? आज बता केम छो? आज सब कैसे हो? So today I'm going over Venus's retrograde transit and its debilitation sign of Pisces from about March 2nd to April 13th of 2025. So this is about 6 weeks or a month and a half, which is typical for Venus's retrogrades. Just a quick thing. I just made a video on Mercury's forward transit in the sign of Pisces in an overlapping time range. So if you want to know more about just how the overall sign of Pisces is acting, I'd recommend watching that one and this one. And then probably in the near future, I'll make a video when Mercury goes retrograde in this sign to kind of get an overall picture about how the whole sign is acting, right? But this is just from Venus's perspective as it goes backward in the sign of Pisces, right? Now, first thing is first, how does Venus act in Pisces, right? It gets debilitated here. What does this mean? So you have to build up all the layers slowly, right? So I'll start off with Venus in Pisces, then how it is retrograde, and then how it is in conjunction with all these other planets. And I'll have to include how they all act in Pisces as well. Okay, and I'll try to do this in a reasonable time fashion. So Venus in Pisces, right? Overall, it acts pretty well, right? Why? Because Venus is a sign of enjoyment. So when in Pisces is a sign of like detachment, letting loose, etc. So when you feel real, loose and free, when you're trying to enjoy, it could be, with your friends out for dinner, it could be with your spouse or your person you're dating, on a weekend evening, right? It's the enjoyment is in a very elevated place, right? Which is why Venus gets exalted in Pisces, right? It's a spiritually best placement for Venus, okay, which is overall pretty good. Now, however, unfortunately, the scriptures do say that when a planet is retrograde and exalted, it behaves as if it's almost debilitated, and vice versa. When it's exalted and retrograde, it behaves as if it's debilitated. In this situation, it would be no different off of glance, right? And the reason why Venus in Pisces, when it's retrograde, acts in a, I'm not going to say it behaves as if it's debilitated from a spiritual standpoint, right? Maybe not a material standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint. And the reason is this. So Venus gets exalted in Pisces because it's able to let loose. And the reason why it gets debilitated in Virgo is because of the opposite. It feels really confined, rigid, restricted, rule-based, etc., right? Now, you could say in general, when a planet is retrograde, and almost every single topic here I have a video on, by the way, explaining it in detail if it's not enough. And you can ask me for it in the comments where specific videos are. But for example, retrograde, I have another retrograde video. But anyways, when Venus is retrograde, you could say your enjoyment is hyper-fixated or hyper-focused in a certain area. So for example, when Venus is debilitated, it is in Virgo, right? And your enjoyment is kind of restricted. But if the Venus is retrograde and your enjoyment is very hyper fixated, like I need to be enjoying, at this restaurant or with this person or in this certain way, that it's not acting all free and stuff. It's acting very, narrow. That Virgo energies of debilitation now help that Venus bloom and excel and achieve its new retrograde goals, right? It's moving backwards. It's almost acting as if I could say it's acting as if it's the complete opposite, but it's acting in a very much different energy. Okay, I'll just put it like that. So therefore, when it's in Pisces, it has a very rigid, narrow goal of how it wants to exert its enjoyment, right? In regards to various variables in real life. That freeness of Pisces now no longer supports the Venus, trying to achieve a very certain mission. Okay. This is why people could say in general that retrograde planets are sort of bad or malefic, right? It's because it's not bad or malefic. It's just they don't understand that it's hyper fixating on a certain thing to an extent. Okay. So when that happens, whenever you hyperfixate on something, you kind of lose control in a certain sense. So people don't like that. Okay, but so Venus here in Pisces, right? It's free, it's acting free, it's able to enjoy, but the retrograde is making you say, hey, I need it to be like this. So because you need it to be like this, the overall energy of being in a free environment no longer supports it, right? It's like let's just say you're a very fun person, right? Whenever you're, in a fun, loose environment, it's great, right? I'll just leave it at that. But now if you're that same person in that same environment and you have a very, very, very certain mission, it kind of just takes the fun out of it. You know what I'm saying? It kind of adds stress and things like that. And your environment and your personality and who you are doesn't really support the goal that you're trying to achieve. Okay, so that's that at a glance. Now, in general, in this transit, there's going to be a few interesting conjunctions here. Okay, there's going to be a Mercury conjunction. There's going to be a Sun conjunction. And there's going to be a Rahu conjunction, I think in that order. Okay. Now, throughout this time, actually Mercury enters Pisces, right? So the Venus is going backwards and Mercury is going forward. So they'll cross. And then the Mercury will go retrograde, but it will never like overlap and pass the Venus, right? The Venus will be at a lower degrees of Pisces, so that Mercury won't catch up, I guess you can say. But it will first cross Mercury, who is going progressive, and then the Mercury will eventually turn around and kind of chase it, you could say. You have a Sun, and you have a Rahu, right? All three of these, in general, when just acknowledging them at a glance, don't really sound too hot for this Venus here. Why? One, the Mercury gets debilitated in Pisces. Two, the Sun is not the biggest fan of Pisces, and you could say from a perspective an enemy of Venus. Three, Rahu, possibly one of the most malefic planets in this whole system, or in this whole Jyotish arena, and it's not going to really add any direct benefit here from from an initial standpoint, right? And I'll explain why. So I'll talk about the first part, the Mercury, okay? So we have Mr. Mercury, so I already explained how the Venus is going backwards, right? Now the Mercury, it's going forward. It gets debilitated in Pisces because it's all about rational intelligence. Mercury is the rational intelligence, person. And the rational intelligence, when that's loose and free flowing, it's not good, right? He's unfocused, he's confused, clouded, frustrated, etc. So if you have this Venus who's kind of has this agenda that's, you could say kind of has this agenda, but it's not really supportive in this environment that it's in. And then you have this other friend of Venus who's coming, and this Venus is not, the friend who's coming, which is Mercury, is not liking the environment at all. You could see how this just adds frustration to the whole situation, right? So to be a little bit more specific, Venus, so it's trying to enjoy in a very certain direct outlet, right? And now this Mercury is feeling very clouded and lost and things like that. So what could happen here is the Venus could, because I'm giving this video from the perspective of Venus. If you want the perspective of Mercury, you can just watch my Mercury video that I just made. But the Venus here, if I'm Venus and I am focusing on enjoyment and I'm targeted towards a very certain path and I run into someone who is lost and things like that, it could kind of lead me astray of the bigger picture, right? Now, how this outlets, it could be in a few different ways, and you kind of have to see, okay, the rest of the chart and things like that. But ways this could outlet is it could make, especially because Rahu is kind of nearby. And this is the first situation is kind of more with Rahu here. It could make you feel like whatever it is you're chasing in the sense of Venus could remove some clarity that some confusion that you're feeling and give you clarity. It could make it so that whatever you're trying to chase, it is not giving you the best plan to chase it because of the confusion of Mercury. Let's just leave it at that. I can keep going for a long time. But yeah, so these are actually really two really good examples. There's the first one, which has to do with the conjunction of Rahu, and the second one, which doesn't, right? So this is kind of how this Mercury here affects it, right? Now, when the Mercury turns retrograde, it's a little bit different. And I'll explain that in my Mercury retrograde video because the Venus here, it only crosses the progressive Mercury. Okay, so the retrograde Mercury is quite behind. But basically, after the Mercury turns retrograde, the second option of how you're going to achieve the enjoyment and things like that, you have a better chance of, not following like a super ungrounded plan to get there, or your chances of it being like some wild hysterical plan are less. Okay, but I'll talk about that more later. Then the Venus is also going to cross a sun, right? Now the sun here, your sun basically represents your identity, your ego, things like that. So your identity and your ego feels lost. So in general, when this Venus crosses the sun, it could feel like whatever it's lost but trying to desperately chase, right? It could feel like whatever it's chasing could give it a sense of identity and purpose. Okay. Yeah, I guess you can say that, right? It could feel more fulfilling, I guess. Fulfilling is not the right word, but it could feel more satisfactory than it should or it could or something along those lines, right? There's many different ways I can word this, but hopefully that made sense. And then it's going to pass the infamous Rahu, right? And the Rahu is basically just going to make it. Now, luckily, the Rahu's at an early degrees of Pisces, okay? But it's basically just going to make it seem like, now I'm going to use the word fulfilling, like whatever it is that you're chasing. And luckily also, it gets real close to Rahu at the end of the retrograde. So the planet is moving slow. So it is actually slowing down, moving backwards. But it is making it seem as if whatever it is that you're chasing, especially as it gets closer and closer to Aquarius and it's slowing down, that whatever it is that you're chasing, and this is actually one of those situations, unfortunately, where the slowing down of Venus could actually, usually whenever a planet gets real close to stationary, it's especially when it's retrograde and it's slowing down, getting ready to go forward, it's usually always from a spiritual perspective, it's good. But here, because it's crossing right over Rahu in this period, the Rahu could use that to its advantage, right? Similar to how people could see, because when a planet is getting ready to go stationary, it's basically at a very high level. It's in a more heightened, spiritually heightened, aware, elevated state, right? But Rahu's like you can say like not a very good energy here. So it's kind of going to try to take advantage of Venus in its more spiritually elevated place, similar to how certain people could try to take advantage of a priest, right? Now I know Venus is not no priest, but what I'm saying is or people who are trying to do the right thing, or trying to elevate themselves spiritually. There's people that will always try to take advantage of that, and Rahu here is right here, right? But that aside, just overall Rahu, because I realize I'm getting close to 15 minutes here, Rahu is going to try to make it seem like whatever the Venus is trying to achieve and stuff like that, that's going to bring you maximum fulfillment in like your life, and this is what you need to be happy and things like that. And in general, you could say things like that, right? Now, I kind of was a little bit all over the place because there's a lot of variables and components here, right? You have the Mercury who's there, but then after the Venus crosses, it goes backwards. You have a sun here and you have the Rahu kind of when the Venus is slowing down. So there's a lot of different components here. But what's the overall takeaway message here, right? The Mercury, the Sun, and the Rahu, they are all, what's the theme that they're all trying to do, right? They're all trying to make it seem to Venus a little bit more, because they're all kind of thinking planets, right? They're all kind of up here, Rahu, Sun, Mercury. They're all trying to make it seem like, hey, Venus is lost, just trying to enjoy, but it has, like, you could say, like this karmic mission, right? Since it's retrograde. And they're all trying to make it seem like, yeah, that's almost what you need to do to feel that freedom again. Once you get this, that freedom that Venus is kind of looking for, that exalted freedom in Pisces, that is not exactly it, but that certain sense of freedom that Venus aspires to have. Once you get this, it's like then that freedom will come, right? But we all know that that's not true. Once we all have certain, with certain things in our life, we all have certain criteria and things like that, where it's like, if I just had this, I'm set, right? If I just had this, I'm able to move on. If somebody just did this, if somebody just told me this, if somebody did not tell me this, or if somebody did not do this, I'm able to move forward and free, and my future's all good, right? But we all know that's a bunch of nonsense. Okay, so that's the takeaway here, right? Enjoy the fact that your enjoyment is a little bit more loose and free. Acknowledge the fact that this retrograde Venus is trying to steer you in a certain direction, and acknowledge the fact that these conjunctions are really trying to shine some light, even extra, on this thing that you might aspire, and it will be stronger or worse depending on the dashas you're running, right? Like if you're running something like Rahu, Mercury, Venus, this is going to be really, coincidentally during this month and a half, this is going to be really strong here. Okay, but yeah, the things that Venus wants to accomplish, think about it a little bit, especially after the Mercury turns retrograde, but don't feel like it needs to happen in a very certain way, and then just acknowledge, even if it does happen, that your happiness is not dependent on it, and it's not going to come from it. Okay, and try to stay grounded and not do things that you shouldn't do in the hopes of that, hey, this is going to give me what I'm looking for, right? It's going to fill this hole inside me, this hole in my heart, hole in my soul, hole in my mind that I've been desperately looking to fill, because I can almost promise you this is not going to fill it up. Okay. So yeah, that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, as usual, you can feel free to let me know. And until next time, I'll talk to everyone later. Thank you all very, very much for watching.